I want to start today's deep dive with a detail that it completely reframed how I see our subject.
Right.
We think of him as this marble statue, right?
Right.
Or a national holiday, a street name.
Almost not a real person.
Exactly. But when he died at the age of 39, the autopsy revealed something absolutely startling. The doctors noted that while his chronological age was 39, he had the heart of a 60-year-old man.
Wow. That's a detail that really stops you in your tracks.
It does.
It's like a physiological receipt for the life he lived.
A perfect way to put it. It wasn't just genetics. It was a physical testament to the crushing, the absolutely unrelenting stress of 13 years of leadership. A 60-year-old heart in a 39-year-old body.
And that's why we're doing this. Today we are talking about Martin Luther King Jr., but not the version you get in a 30-second soundbite in February.
No. We're going to try and strip away the myth and really look at the man.
You have to. Because when you treat someone like a saint, you often stop listening to what they actually said. And King said some things, especially in his final years, that absolutely terrified the status quo.
And speaking of myths, let's just shatter the first one right out of the gate. His name wasn't Martin.
That's right. He was born Michael King Jr. on January 15th, 1929 in Atlanta. His father was Michael King Sr. For the first few years of his life, everybody knew him as Little Mike.
Little Mike. So how do we get from Little Mike to, one of the most famous names in world history, Martin Luther?
Well, it was a decision made by his father, by Big Mike.
Yeah.
He traveled to Germany in 1934 for a Baptist World Alliance meeting. And while he was there, he was just deeply moved by the story of Martin Luther.
The German monk, the one who kicked off the Protestant Reformation.
Exactly. So he sees this figure who stood up to the most powerful institution on earth at the time, the Catholic Church, and just demanded change. He stared them down.
So he comes home from this trip and just rebrands.
Essentially, yes. He comes home and changes his own name, and he changes his son's name. It was this incredible reclaiming of identity. It was almost a prophecy, in a way. He was marking his son as a reformer before the boy could even tie his own shoes.
That's incredible. So our mission today is to cover the entire life. We've got a stack of sources here: biographies, recently declassified FBI files, academic investigations into his writings, analyses of his global impact. We really want to understand how a local Baptist minister became a global human rights icon.
And crucially, why his final year was actually his most dangerous. We have to talk about the controversies, too. We can't shy away from the things that make people uncomfortable, like the plagiarism accusations or the FBI surveillance.
No, you can't. You have to look at the whole picture. So let's get into that origin story. Atlanta, 1929. He's born into a family of pastors.
Oh, absolutely. The pulpit was basically the family business. His grandfather, A.D. Williams, and then his father both preached at Ebenezer Baptist Church. It was the center of their world.
But what stands out in the early biographical notes isn't just his theology. It's his mind. The kid was, well, a genius.
He was intellectually precocious, to say the least. The notes say he entered Morehouse College at age 15.
15.
Yeah. I mean, think about what you were doing at 15.
Trying to get a learner's permit and definitely failing algebra.
Exactly. King is entering college. He skipped both the 9th and 12th grades entirely. So he's sitting in college classrooms reading sociology, history, and theology, while most kids his age are still figuring out high school.
And from there, the academic journey just accelerates.
It does. He goes to Crozer Theological Seminary, graduates in 1951, and then heads north to Boston University for his PhD.
And Boston is where he meets Coretta Scott.
Right. A pivotal moment. She was a student herself at the New England Conservatory of Music. They met there, got married in 1953. So you have this image forming of a young, brilliant, highly educated power couple.
But since we promised to look at the whole life, we have to pause here. Right at his academic career.
Right.
Because there's a massive elephant in the room when it comes to his doctoral work.
There is. Yeah, I was reading through the source material on this, and honestly, I was surprised I hadn't heard more about it, the plagiarism scandal.
It's a very sensitive topic, but it's historically significant, and you can't ignore it. In the 1980s, the King Papers Project at Stanford University started this massive undertaking of archiving everything King ever wrote. And as they started digging into his dissertation and his student papers, they found patterns.
Patterns is a very diplomatic way of saying it.
Well, what they found was that he had appropriated passages from other sources without proper attribution. Specifically, large chunks of his dissertation were lifted almost word for word from a man named Jack Boozer, who had written his dissertation on a similar topic a few years earlier. So we're talking straight up copying.
By modern academic standards, yes. There's really no other word for it. It was plagiarism.
So how did Boston University handle that? I mean, this panel convenes in 1991. King has been dead for over 20 years at this point. He's an American icon. You can't exactly expel him posthumously.
It was an incredibly difficult situation for the university. They convened a panel of scholars to investigate. They looked at all the evidence, and their final report found serious problems. They admitted that parts of the work were, in fact, plagiarized.
There's a big but coming, I feel.
There is. The but is that they decided not to revoke his doctorate.
What was the justification for that?
Their conclusion was that despite the borrowed text, the dissertation as a whole still made an intelligent contribution to scholarship. The core argument, the thesis, was King's, even if some of the bricks he used to build it were, let's say, borrowed without asking.
I see. But there's another layer to this defense, isn't there? The sonnet has mentioned something about voice merging.
Yes, and this is a fascinating argument from scholars like Keith Miller. To understand it, you have to remember that King was a product of the Black folk preaching tradition. In that world, in the oral tradition of the church, language is a shared treasury.
Okay, what do you mean by that?
Well, preachers borrow riffs, they borrow theological arguments, they borrow powerful phrases from their mentors or from famous sermons all the time. It's not seen as theft. It's seen as carrying on a tradition. It's honoring your predecessors.
So it's almost like sampling in hip-hop.
That's a really decent analogy. It's remixing. Miller's argument is that King essentially carried this oral tradition habit into the very rigid, very different written world of academia. He wasn't necessarily trying to be deceitful. He was trying to synthesize the two worlds he lived in.
Right. Now, whether you buy that as a valid excuse for a PhD dissertation is, up for debate.
Absolutely. Critics call it straight theft. Defenders see it as a cultural nuance. But what it does, I think, is humanize him. It reminds us he wasn't a perfect machine. He was a man operating between different cultures with different rules.
Definitely. Let's move from the academic to the philosophical. Because while he was at university, he was building the intellectual engine that would drive the entire movement. We always hear about Gandhi.
Gandhi was the blueprint for the method. King was utterly fascinated by how Mahatma Gandhi used nonviolent resistance, satyagraha, to break the back of British rule in India.
But King needed more than a method. He needed a goal. He didn't just want to disrupt the system. He wanted to replace it with something better.
And that's where the concept of the beloved community comes in.
I think this term gets misused a lot today. It sounds very soft and gentle, like let's all just hold hands and get along.
It does sound gentle, but it is an incredibly radical concept. And you're right, it wasn't King's phrase originally. It was coined by the philosopher Josiah Royce. But King took it and made it the cornerstone of his entire worldview.
And the sources are really clear on this. He believed conflict was inevitable.
Absolutely. The beloved community is not the absence of tension. It's a society where, and this is his framing, justice and love mutually uplift one another. The key distinction is the goal of the conflict.
Right. In a war, the goal is to defeat and humiliate your enemy.
Exactly. In the beloved community, the goal is reconciliation. The goal is redemption. You are fighting your opponent to win them over, not to destroy them. You want to create a relationship where there wasn't one before.
And to do that, you need a very specific kind of love. He was really into the Greek distinctions of love, and I think this is crucial for understanding his mindset.
It is. Can you break this down for us?
Sure. So the Greeks had different words for different types of love. There's eros, which is, romantic or aesthetic love, the love of beauty.
Then there's philia.
Philia, which is love between friends. It's a reciprocal love. You love me, so I love you back. It's warm, but it's conditional.
And then there's the big one, the heavy lifter.
Agape. This is the engine of the movement. Agape is an understanding, redeeming goodwill for all people. It is, as he put it, purely spontaneous, unmotivated, groundless, and creative. It is the love of God operating in the human heart.
And here's the kicker. It's the love you are required to give to your enemy.
That feels impossible. I mean, how do you have agape love for a police officer who's unleashing a dog on you? Or the person who just bombed your house?
And that is the absolute core of the philosophy. King argued that you love the person because you recognize that the evil system of oppression is damaging them too. It's twisting their soul while it's hurting your body. So you fight the system with nonviolence to liberate both the oppressed and the oppressor.
It's a moral framework that just demands incredible discipline.
It demands that you are not a coward. That's one of his 6 principles of nonviolence that people often forget. Nonviolence, he said, is a way of life for courageous people.
Okay, so he has the education, he has the philosophy. Now he just needs the moment.
Yeah.
And it comes in 1955, Montgomery, Alabama.
The spark. December 1st, 1955. Rosa Parks, a respected member of the community, refuses to give up her seat on a segregated bus.
And King is only 26 years old at this point.
Yeah.
He's the new pastor at Dexter Avenue Baptist Church. He hasn't been in town that long.
No, he's the new guy. And in some ways, that's exactly why he was picked to lead the Montgomery Improvement Association, the group organizing the boycott. He wasn't entrenched in the local politics or the rivalries between other ministers yet. He was a fresh face.
But leading this boycott wasn't a part-time job. This thing lasted 382 days.
Over a year. Just try to wrap your head around the logistics of that. The entire Black community of Montgomery refusing to ride the buses. They organized these complex carpools. They walked for miles to and from work every single day.
And the backlash was immediate and violent.
Oh, absolutely. King was arrested. And then the violence hit home in the most terrifying way. His house was bombed while Coretta and their infant daughter were inside.
That has to be the moment where you question everything, where you think, is this worth it?
It was his trial by fire. I mean, he rushes home, sees the damage, makes sure his family is safe, and then he comes out and speaks to the angry crowd that is gathered. And instead of calling for revenge, he calls for calm and for agape. He lives the philosophy right there on his own shattered porch.
And eventually, it worked.
It worked. In November 1956, the Supreme Court ruled that bus segregation was unconstitutional. They had won.
That victory must have been absolutely electric.
It was proof of concept. It showed that nonviolent direct action wasn't just a locked philosophy. It was a practical tool that could bend the will of the federal government and change the law.
So to capitalize on that momentum, they formed the SCLC, the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, in 1957.
Exactly. The goal was essentially to franchise the Montgomery model, to provide the organizational muscle, the training, and the leadership to take that strategy and apply it to other cities across the South.
Which leads us a few years later to the early 60s, and specifically to Birmingham, Alabama in 1963.
Birmingham. This feels different in the historical record. It feels more aggressive, more confrontational.
It was a strategic pivot. They literally call it Project C.
Yeah.
And the C stood for confrontation.
Correct. They chose Birmingham very deliberately because they knew its Commissioner of Public Safety, Eugene Bull was a hot-headed, volatile racist. They anticipated that if they pushed him, he would overreact spectacularly.
That sounds incredibly calculating. I mean, they were literally counting on his brutality.
They were. Because they understood the power of television, they needed the violence that was always simmering just under the surface of the segregated South to be made visible to the entire world. They needed to create a crisis.
And Connor gave them exactly what they needed.
He walked right into the trap. He brought out the attack dogs. He ordered his men to turn the fire hoses on peaceful protesters, including children.
And the cameras were rolling the whole time.
That was the key. When those images of children being blasted by high-pressure water, of dogs lunging at teenagers, when those hit the nightly news and the front pages of newspapers around the world, it shocked the conscience of the nation. It made segregation impossible to ignore any longer.
And while all this chaos is unfolding on the streets, King is in a cell, writing one of the most famous documents in American history.
The letter from Birmingham jail. And it's so important to remember who he was writing to. He wasn't writing to Bull Connor or the KKK. He was writing to a group of white, moderate clergymen.
The people who are saying, we agree with your goal, but you're moving too fast. Your timing is bad. Just wait.
Right. And King just methodically dismantles that argument. He writes, "For years now I have heard the word wait. It rings in the ear of every Negro with piercing familiarity. This wait has almost always meant never."
And he gives us that famous line, "Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere."
It's a masterpiece of moral and logical argumentation, written on scraps of paper and smuggled out of his cell.
Later that same year, 1963, we get the March on Washington, 250,000 people. And the speech, "I have a dream."
It was the high watermark of the movement's public appeal, the moment of maximum unity. And since we touched on the authorship debates earlier, there's an interesting little note here, too. Scholars have pointed out that the famous "Let Freedom Ring" closing of that speech has some very strong parallels to a 1952 speech by a Chicago preacher named Archibald Carey Jr.
So another potential instance of that voice merging we talked about.
It seems likely, but King's delivery, the moment, the setting on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial, he took those words and made them his own in a way that just changed history. That speech directly led to him being named Time Magazine's Man of the Year.
And then, the following year, the Nobel Peace Prize in 1964.
He was 35 years old, the youngest recipient ever at that time. And, totally consistent with his character, he donated the entire prize money, over $54,000, a huge sum back then, right back into the civil rights movement.
So you look at that decade, from 1955 to 1965. You have Montgomery, Birmingham, the March on Washington, the Nobel Prize, and finally Selma in 1965 and Bloody Sunday at the Edmund Pettus Bridge, which leads directly to the Voting Rights Act. If this were a movie, the credits would roll right here.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The laws are changed, legal segregation is dead, the hero wins, fade to black.
But this isn't a movie. And we know that 1965 wasn't the end. In fact, you could argue this is where the story gets much more complex and, frankly, much more dangerous for Martin Luther King Jr.
This is the pivot point. Because after the Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act, King had this profound realization that legal equality was not the same as actual equality. You can have the right to sit at a lunch counter, but it doesn't mean a thing if you can't afford to buy the burger.
And this brings us to what he called the triple evils.
Yes, this is the absolute core of his later philosophy, and it's what often gets left out of the history books. King identified three deeply interrelated evils that trapped people in a cycle of despair: racism, poverty, and militarism.
And he saw them as a package deal, right? Couldn't just pick one.
Exactly. You cannot effectively fight one without fighting the others. You can't solve racism if you still have systemic poverty that keeps people segregated and desperate. And you can't solve poverty in your own country if your nation is obsessed with militarism and pouring all its resources into foreign wars.
This realization is what drove him to take the movement out of the rural South and into the urban North.
Chicago, 1966. The Chicago Freedom Movement. And this was a profound shock to the system for everyone involved, including King.
How so?
Well, in the South, the racism was overt. It was whites-only signs and sheriffs with dogs. In Chicago, the racism was pervert. It was structural. It was economic. It was redlining in housing. It was employment discrimination. It was slumlords exploiting tenants in ghettos. It was harder to put on a protest sign.
And the reception King got in Chicago was, by all accounts, just as violent, if not more so, than in the South.
It was brutal. King moved his own family into a slum apartment on the west side to highlight the conditions. And during a march in Marquette Park, an all-white neighborhood, he was hit in the head with a brick.
I read that he said later that he had never seen moms as hostile and full of hate, not in Mississippi or Alabama as he saw in Chicago.
That's a staggering statement, isn't it, given what he went through in Birmingham? But it shows how deep the economic racism went. In the South, he was challenging a social order. In the North, he was threatening people's property values and the entire economic status quo.
And then he made the decision that truly alienated him from the establishment. This is what you call the radical year, from 1967 to 1968. He decided to take on the third evil, militarism.
April 4th, 1967, exactly 1 year to the day before his assassination, he stands at the pulpit of Riverside Church in New York City and delivers his Beyond Vietnam speech.
And this wasn't some vague, gentle call for peace. This was a blistering, prophetic critique of American foreign policy.
It was a thunderclap. He called the United States government the greatest purveyor of violence in the world today. He didn't mince words. He linked the war in Vietnam directly to the poverty at home.
What was that connection exactly?
He argued that the bombs being dropped in Vietnam were also exploding in the ghettos of America because they were destroying the hopes and draining the resources that were desperately needed to fight poverty at home. The war on poverty was being lost because of the war in Vietnam.
The backlash must have been absolutely immense.
It was catastrophic for his public standing. President Lyndon B. Johnson, who had been an ally on civil rights, who had signed the Voting Rights Act, was absolutely furious. He felt betrayed and essentially cut King off completely.
But it wasn't just the White House.
No, this is the crucial part. The liberal media turned on him. The New York Times, the Washington Post, they both wrote scathing editorials criticizing him for linking the two issues.
And even other civil rights leaders were unhappy with him.
And that, according to his friends, hurt him the most. The NAACP, leaders like Roy Wilkins, other mainstream black leaders, they thought he was making a huge tactical error. They basically told him to stay in his lane. Focus on civil rights, Martin. Foreign policy is not your issue.
The Cavis-Smiley analysis in our sources points out that King was incredibly isolated during this time, that he was deeply depressed.
He was. By all accounts, he was despondent. He was being attacked from all sides. The right attacked him for being unpatriotic, and the left attacked him for being strategically naive. But he didn't retreat. He doubled down.
He doubled down by launching the Poor People's Campaign.
The most ambitious, most radical thing he ever attempted. The goal was a multiracial coalition. Poor Black people from the Mississippi Delta, poor whites from Appalachia, Latinos from the Southwest, indigenous people all marching on Washington together.
And the plan was to occupy the Capitol.
Yes, to build a tent city, Resurrection City, right on the National Mall, and to stay there, engaging in civil disobedience until the government passed an economic Bill of Rights.
He was moving from civil rights to human rights. He was talking about a radical redistribution of political and economic power.
That is language that terrifies the establishment to its core. He wasn't just asking for a seat on the bus anymore. He was questioning who owned the bus company in the first place.
Before we get to the end, though, we have to zoom out for a second. Because while he was being isolated and attacked in Washington, his stature as a global figure was only growing.
That's a great point. His international reach was profound. He never saw the American civil rights movement as a purely American phenomenon. He saw it as one front in a worldwide struggle against colonialism and oppression.
We know about his connection to the anti-apartheid movement in South Africa.
He was a fierce and early critic of apartheid. There's a direct line of inspiration you can draw from King's nonviolent resistance to the struggle in South Africa. Nelson Mandela himself later cited King as a major influence.
And his trip to India in 1959 seems like a key moment.
That was a pilgrimage for him. He said he went to India not as a tourist, but as a pilgrim. He wanted to see the land of Gandhi. But while he was there, he was deeply struck by the plight of the Dalits, the people formerly known as untouchables.
He saw a parallel.
A direct parallel. He said that the caste system in India and the racial caste system in America were mirrored images of the same evil. It just reinforced his idea that this was a universal fight for human dignity.
So we arrive at April 1968. King is exhausted. He's arguably one of the most hated men in America by the government and the mainstream press. He's in the middle of planning this massive, chaotic Poor People's Campaign, and he takes a detour to Memphis.
And the context of Memphis is so important. He wasn't there for a big award or a fancy speech. He was there for a strike.
The sanitation workers.
These were men working in absolutely horrific conditions for starvation wages. Just before the strike, 2 workers had been crushed to death in the back of a malfunctioning garbage truck. The city refused to do anything to improve safety, so they marched, carrying those iconic, simple signs, "I am a man."
And King goes to support them. But the atmosphere described in the sources is just incredibly heavy.
He was sick, he had a fever, he was rattled by the constant escalating death threats, and on the night of April 3rd, a storm is raging in Memphis, and he gets up and delivers his final speech, what we now call the mountaintop speech.
I've listened to that speech so many times. It's haunting.
It really is. He talks about all the threats, he talks about his own mortality, and then he says that line, "I've been to the mountaintop, and I've seen the promised land. I may not get there with you."
It sounds like he knew.
It's so hard to interpret it any other way. In that moment, it feels like he was saying goodbye.
April 4th, 1968, the Lorraine Motel.
Room 306. It's just after 6 p.m. King is getting ready for dinner at the home of a local minister. He's joking around with his friends, and he steps out onto the second-floor balcony. He sees Ben Branch, a musician, down in the parking lot below.
And his very last words were a request for a song.
Yes. He leaned over the railing and called down, "Ben, make sure you take my hand, precious Lord, in the meeting tonight. Play it real pretty."
And then the shot rings out.
A single bullet from a .30-06 rifle fired from a rooming house across the street. It struck him in the jaw, it severed his spinal cord, and lodged in his shoulder.
The chaos on that balcony must have been just unimaginable. Ralph Abernathy, Jesse Jackson, they were all right there with him.
They rushed him to St. Joseph's Hospital, but the damage was just too catastrophic. He was pronounced dead at 7:05 p.m.
And the immediate aftermath across the country was exactly the kind of violence he had spent his entire life fighting against.
An absolute explosion of grief and rage. Riots erupted in over 100 cities, Washington, D.C., Chicago, Baltimore. Parts of them were literally burning.
Now we have to address the investigation. Because officially, the story ends with one man, James Earl Ray.
Ray was a small-time criminal, an escaped convict. A massive international manhunt led to his arrest 2 months later in London at Heathrow Airport. He was extradited, and to avoid the death penalty, he pleaded guilty to the murder and was sentenced to 99 years in prison.
But he recanted his confession almost immediately.
Almost right away. He spent the rest of his life claiming he was a patsy, a fall guy for a much larger conspiracy involving a mysterious man he only knew as Raoul.
And this is where the story gets incredibly complicated, because the King family, his own wife and children, eventually came to believe him.
They did. Coretta Scott King and their children publicly supported Ray's efforts to get a new trial. And then, in 1999, the family did something unprecedented. They filed a wrongful death civil suit, not against Ray, but against a Memphis restaurant owner named Lloyd Jowers.
Jowers owned a grill near the motel, right?
Yeah.
He had claimed he was part of the plot.
Yes. Jowers had gone on national television and claimed he was paid to help orchestrate the assassination. The civil trial was a spectacle, and the jury eventually returned a verdict in favor of the King family. They concluded that there was a conspiracy involving Jowers and, quote, others, including governmental agencies.
That sounds pretty definitive. But it directly contradicts the official history.
It does, because after that verdict, the Department of Justice launched another massive reinvestigation. Their report, released in 2000, concluded that there was no reliable evidence to support Jowers' claims or the existence of this Raoul. They upheld the original finding that James Earl Ray acted alone.
So we're left with this split reality. The family and a civil jury say conspiracy. The federal government says lone gunman.
And you have to view that skepticism in light of COINTELPRO.
Right, the FBI's counterintelligence program.
We know for a fact from their own files that the FBI under J. Edgar Hoover was obsessed with destroying King. They wiretapped his phones, they bugged his hotel rooms, they tried to find any dirt they could on him.
And they sent him the infamous suicide letter.
The suicide letter is one of the most shameful documents in American history. It was a composite tape of his alleged extramarital affairs recorded in his hotel rooms, along with an anonymous letter urging him to kill himself before he was exposed as a fraud.
That is just chilling.
It is.
Okay.
So even if you believe the FBI didn't pull the trigger in Memphis, they absolutely created an environment where King was hunted, harassed, and delegitimized.
And the mention of the affairs, that brings us full circle back to the man versus the statue theme. The sources, including the autobiography of his best friend, Ralph Abernathy, confirmed that King was not a faithful husband.
He wasn't. He was a deeply flawed human being. He had profound vices. But the revisionist view argues that we shouldn't hide that. Acknowledging his flaws, his humanity, actually makes his courage and his sacrifice more real, not less.
Right. He wasn't a saint who descended from heaven. He was a human being struggling with his own morality while trying to carry the moral weight of an entire nation on his shoulders.
Yes.
So when we step back and look at this entire deep dive, from the boy named Michael to the brilliant scholar accused of plagiarism, to the young leaguer Montgomery, to the exhausted radical prophet in Memphis, what's the final picture we see?
We see a strategist. We see a radical thinker. We see someone who understood, maybe better than anyone, that the American dream was structurally impossible for millions of people unless the entire system changed in a fundamental way.
So his real legacy isn't just the "I have a dream" speech. It's the unfinished work.
It's the triple evils. I mean, just look at the world today. Are we free of racism? Are we free of poverty? Are we free of militarism?
Not even close.
Then King's work is still right here, waiting for us to pick it up.
And that detail we started with about his heart, that 60-year-old heart in a 39-year-old body, it just drives home the point that he gave everything. He didn't just die for the movement on April 4th. He was being consumed by it literally every single day.
He gave his life long before the bullet ever struck.
That is a powerful place to leave it. We really hope this deep dive gave you a new, fuller perspective on a figure you thought you knew.
It's a story that absolutely demands to be retold in its entirety.
Absolutely. If you found this deep dive into Dr. King's life valuable, make sure you subscribe to History Titans. We want to keep bringing you these full, unvarnished stories. And I have a question for you to chew on. Of King's triple evils, poverty, racism, or militarism, which one do you think is the most urgent fight for our society to tackle today?
That's a great question. I'll be reading the comments to see what you think.
Let us know. Thanks for listening, and we'll catch you on the next deep dive.